I don't know if Brett will come or if he will find this channel, which isn't my main channel because my main channel received a strike. I know it's also very early in the morning for him, and he may be preparing to go to work. But what I would speak to him about, if he were to come, would concern his comments in the live chat in the Chris Howard stream just ended. And I only posted, I didn't actually participate in it. And we were talking about, well, not talking, we were posting our opinions about religion and politics. Let me scroll down. The live chat. For some reason they were talking about Pygmalion, or Brett was. They were talking about AI. And apparently how AI validates people because it is programmed to reflect themselves back at them in a user-friendly way. But the thing is, AI could be judgmental, it could be harsh, it could be strict, it could be reproving. It just needs to be programmed in a different way, and it will have a quite different relationship with us. Anyway, I'm just guessing at what they were discussing through the comments in the chat, and Brett was the most prolific poster. So he said it's going to be big in the future. I assume he means AI, if everybody is self-consumed with how they feel, because it does nothing but make you feel like you're a genius even when you're wrong. And then he says, the thing that I can't wrap my head around is AI machines talking to other AI machines in languages we have no idea. In a language we have no idea what they're communicating. And then he says, we need an Enigma machine. I don't think it matters, really. It is the principle of the thing, and the principle of the thing is that the powers that be that want to control us will want to control us through AI. And we need to understand how it would work, how it could be made to work, and why we like it so much and could become behaviorally addicted to the idea that we need AI in order to survive. And we might even have withdrawal symptoms when it is withheld from us, and we might think it is some terrible punishment. We also briefly discussed Jordan Peterson and Jordan Hall. And then we started talking about religion and Jay Dyer and Brett's dislike of Jay Dyer. And Lou Thompson suggested to Brett that he should debate Luke Thompson. And Brett said no. But the thing is, what would be the point of saying Orthodox Christianity is better than any other kind of Christianity when you're fighting a war with Russia and seeking to destroy it? It's just putting a label on your back saying, kick me to the current political order, which is run under the principles of matriarchy, which is feminism, promoting the idea of sexual liberation from the rules of marriage and good parenting. I don't think people quite understand what the government is up to, but I thought the subjects discussed in Chris Howard's channel is in a way linked to my most recent stream with Khaled about belief systems and religion. Of course, we're always talking about religion and what is the proper religion to have and which people have the best religion, and nobody really knows. There will always be a hierarchy of beliefs depending on the political order that you live under. And so we have to talk about moral systems, and by that we mean religion or secular political ideologies. Currently, we are living under the liberal orthodoxy, but that is collapsing because it is uncodified. As I was saying to Khaled, liberalism is uncodified like Christianity, and if we know what's good for ourselves, we should choose a moral system that has been codified and is, or if it has not, it is capable of being codified. We already know that most people will not be reading their religious scripture from beginning to end, and they will be relying on hearsay, on what others say their religion is. Most people are lazy, most people are stupid. Not all these codifications are entirely reliable. People fear to discuss religion and politics because their controversial nature means that people are going to attack them if they say the wrong thing or discuss the wrong subject or make certain assumptions. And some subjects are just simply off the table. Since no one is here, it will be quite a short stream. I know that many of these men do not particularly want to engage with me because I'm not one of them. I'm not white, I'm Christian, and I don't agree with them on a whole bunch of things. And I think I am known for making my points crisply and cleanly in a way that leaves no doubt in the mind of the listener. And Brett, though he is by no means a stupid man, has set his heart on being Christian. And although he did speak to me on my other channel last week, he may not do so again, which is a bit of a shame because he's one of the smarter people of the TLC, but clearly emotional because he talks about the woo. He wants the mumbo jumbo and hocus pocus of religion that comes with Orthodox Christianity. He is an ortho bro. And of course, he won't be in agreement with me about Sharia for America, understandably and predictably. We also discussed the about men being created equal, harking back to the American Declaration of Independence, and this is a great subject to discuss because, on the one hand, we equate equality with justice and fairness, and on the other hand, the situation is more nuanced than that because it wouldn't be fair to treat equally things that are not equal with each other. If you are not equal to being a mother who gives birth to children, it would not be fair to say that you can marry a man. If you are not equal to the burdens of soldiering as a woman, then it wouldn't be right to encourage you to join the army. We all have to accept that we are not equal, but in the matter of parenting, I think parents are supposed to say anyway, even if they do not in fact love all their children equally, they have to say, well, I treat, child one differently to child two because of reasons, and these reasons have to be sound and fair enough. But then what is fair to one person will not be fair to another because we all have different opinions about justice and fairness. And really, a lot of childhood is filled with opinions of children who say things are not fair, and then adults tell them, well, life isn't fair, and then we have to work out how to live within the rules or change them. And if we manage to change them, make sure that they operate in a way that is fair. So this goes back to religion, and religion is supposed to make everything okay. It's supposed to regulate our behavior towards our co-religionists and people outside the religion. It is supposed to give us a hierarchy of who is to be leader of that religion, and if it's all working well, we will have a vast empire in which to contain many peoples who will not necessarily be agreeing with us and who may have a very different view of us and our religion, and we need a legal system to assimilate them without destroying their identity, because if you try to destroy their identity, they will cling to it all the more. And so the best way to make them give up their more troubling aspects of their identity is to allow them to keep part of their identity as a price of being accepted in the empire and increasing their chances of doing well. We know from the American Republic that the First Amendment is something that is considered to be distinctly liberal and distinctly American. But really, it comes from the Quran. Chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran says there is no compulsion in belief. Truth stands clear from error. Some people might argue that it is not even unique to Islam because there have been empires who have incorporated peoples of different religions into their empire and let them to keep their religious identity as long as they pay tribute. And this practice seems to have worked reasonably well. But when the empire is collapsing, when it appears to be behaving badly and madly and stupidly, things are not what they should be, and this means that their belief system is collapsing. Nobody really believes in the system anymore, and that is why they don't obey the laws. And if people don't obey the law, there will be confusion, criminality, and chaos, and things will go from bad to worse unless the problem is addressed. And in order to make the case for replacing the current system ringingly clear, you have to explain the progress of the disease and how the disease came to be contracted. So I was explaining to Khalid earlier that all empires become a victim of their own success. They become degenerate, feminized, and sexually liberated in a way, in a significant way compared to their ancestors. And this, I'm saying, is a problem. So I was saying that marriage is eugenic. I didn't actually say it to Khaled, but the implication is there. In order to ensure that your group survives, you have to accept the fact that you need to replace yourself as you grow old and die. And there needs to be a next generation, and they need to be either better in quality than their parents or not worse than their parents. And if they are clearly inferior to their parents, as in economically and socially inferior with all kinds of physical disabilities and learning disabilities, and something has gone wrong. And I'm saying, obviously, the thing that has gone wrong is gender relations, regulating sexual relations between members of that group. And when enough things have gone wrong, the whole system needs to be changed. It's not just a law here and a law there that needs to be changed. The whole system needs to be changed. And this is where I believe we have arrived. So Brett, being an Orthodox Christian, will not be happy with me for saying it's still the wrong religion. I know that he wasn't originally an Orthodox Christian. He was, either Catholic or Protestant, and there are many varieties of Protestantism. And I know a lot of these ortho bros go for Orthodox Christianity because it is exotic, mysterious, and new for them, not like the boring Lutheranism and Pentecostalism and and the Christianities of Western Europe, and what they seem to keep going on about is the mumbo jumbo that they love, the Gregorian chants, the Latin masses, the things that they don't quite understand, and that is what makes them go woo, I guess. They think that there is some mysterious spirit that has entered their souls or something, and they like that feeling. And well, I am just telling them that it's not going to work, because in America, the church is separated from the state, and it doesn't matter which church you go to. Congress is not going to take a blind bit of notice of you when you say that your synagogue or your church or your mosque does not quite agree with the law that Congress has just passed. They're just going to say, well, don't you know that in America the church is separated from the state, and this includes synagogues and mosques and temples and all that. But Brett doesn't quite understand, but I believe he can be made to understand, because he's not. Well, he is an educated man, even if he sometimes posts in broken sentences. And what he said, quote, "I'll never forget when somebody told me God did not create all men equal. It was uncomfortable, but yet obvious at the same time." So that is really his most profound statement. And that was really what I want to talk about: justice and fairness, and whether we were all created equal. And if we were not created equal, then what are we to make of our situation? So I said, Jefferson only meant opportunity to become presidential candidate if certain minimum conditions are fulfilled. Of course, that was what he meant. Jefferson was a lawyer. But Brett, I think, wants to believe in a loving God where everyone is equally loved. Or at least the idea that we all have an equal chance of getting to heaven, provided certain minimum conditions are satisfied. And there is controversy over what these minimum conditions are. And I'm saying, look, it's obvious. If you want to go straight to heaven, you really would have to go for the religion whose scripture vividly describes heaven and hell. And this does not include the New Testament, because we already know that the New Testament was not written by God. In fact, we don't know who wrote Revelation. So now I need to ask, what do I need to ask? What references to the afterlife exists in the New Testament? Okay, so it says, apparently it's in Revelation. Revelation in chapter 21, verse 4 says, promises a future state where God wipes away every tear and death shall be no more. And according to the book of Isaiah, chapter 25, verse 8, it promises that God will swallow up death forever. And this is mentioned in Revelation chapter 21, verse 4. But who wrote Revelation? Let's ask this question. Well, it is the final book of the New Testament. It's also known as Book of the Apocalypse or the Apocalypse of John. And it seems to be saying that John wrote it. The author names himself as simply John in the text, but his precise identity remains a point of academic debate. The sometimes obscure and extravagant imagery of Revelation, with many allusions and numeric symbolism derived from the Old Testament, has allowed a wide variety of Christian interpretations throughout the history of Christianity. Modern biblical scholarship views Revelation as a first-century apocalyptic message warning early Christian communities not to assimilate into Roman imperial culture, interpreting its vivid symbolism through its historical, literary, and cultural lenses. So we don't even know who wrote the book of Revelation, but, well, at least the Christians can't really tell you. And I guess they're going to say, oh, it's some guy called John. The question of, well, why should we listen to some guy called John whom we know nothing about? Well, at least Muslims can say, well, God said so in the Quran, and that's a final word on the matter, and people will have to accept it. So I'm afraid for reasons of authority, of clarity and hierarchy, you have to go to the Quran if you really want. If you really want to be reasonably sure about the afterlife. After all, if God promises you the afterlife, if God has revealed a book for you to read and you read it with understanding and see it as a divine contract between God and man, then you're more likely to feel secure in your belief that if you do as God and you have agreed to do, you are more likely to go to the better place than not. But as for these Christians, they really have nothing to go on. They veer from one kind of Christianity to another, and their Christianity is also fraught with heresies and accusations of heresy. And what is most exasperating of all is that Americans don't seem to understand the implication of having a church that is separated from their state. They just don't seem to get it. And that is why they cling to their Christian identity so fiercely. And they only cling to it because of their hatred of either Jews or Muslims. And they rush to Christianity because they believe it is the ancient religion of their ancestors when their ancestors got to slay Jews and Muslims in the Levant. And this makes them feel good and strong and less helpless than they currently are. But that is really not the way to solve their problems. The only way to solve your problem, whatever it is to understand the cause of it. And since Brett is quite simply unable to contemplate the possibility that Christianity may be the cause of all these problems in the West as well as in America, he will never get the better. You'll never get a better political system or belief system that he can defend with confidence. I believe that the reason why I am so feared and hated is that I do argue from a position of logic, and it is the belief system of the Abrahamic God that enables my confidence and conviction and my logic and I guess my serenity. If your belief is based on your hatred and fear for certain groups, and you go to a religion that is nonsense and idolatry and blasphemy, then you won't be able to logically defend your position. How can it be denied that the last 250 years of Western history has been a progressive rejection of Christianity, of moving away from the age of monarchy to an age of republicanism? And religion, sorry, all societies, whatever their political system, needs to be governed by law, and that the law needs to be fair enough. And not only must the law sound fair enough in theory, it has to also be operated, interpreted, enforced in a way that seems fair to most people. And if most of your politicians are corrupt, if you have the problem of rising crime and lowering standards of education and behavior, then you do have a problem. And it won't help if you keep confusing the symptoms for the disease. I think Brett is capable of understanding what I'm saying. It's just that he does hold very strong emotions of hatred towards certain groups. I totally understand why we would prefer our own opinion to the opinion of other people. But what is the standard? We are not always right, and other people are not always wrong. So there must be a valid and trustworthy system of verification of what is right and what is wrong. And I do really make such a point of only using facts and logic. And I fear when talking to Christians, they do not want to use facts and logic. They will have to retreat into hatred and fear, which sadly their corrupt and incompetent ruling classes will be using against them in order to motivate them into, well, joining the armed forces, hating certain groups, and doing probably horrible things in the name of Jesus. So this is the danger that I foresee for Westerners who are more keen on affirming their belief system with emotion and violence than in arriving at a sound conclusion based on sound arguments. This makes it, well, logic is not as exciting as romance and violence and anger and rage and emotion. And I think for this reason, a lot of people will just dispense with facts and logic and go with the herd, the cattle, the sheeple, because it just seems safer to be part of a bigger group than a smaller group. Sadly, people like Paul Van der Clay, who could really be using their leadership position in a more constructive way, will have a vested interest in pandering to the coastal elites of America. He is part of it after all, in a way, in that he's based in California. He travels to Europe a lot, and because he is a pastor, he will be welcomed by the fake Christians of Britain and Europe. Do they really believe that Jesus is God? I'm sure it's not something they ever discuss with each other, but if it is true that God forbade idolatry, then it would be a mortal sin if they keep imagining Jesus every time they pray to God. And the operating damage of visualizing a man on a cross when they pray to God is that they do not fear God. And I feel sure that they don't really believe in the afterlife, which is why they are so indifferent to the fact that Christianity is idolatry. It is idolatry compounded by blasphemy, but it's still a business model for the likes of Paul Van der Clay, and all he has to do is pander to his already Islamophobic viewers and subscribers, and he's there. He gets his super chats, he gets his subscribers, and I guess that's enough. And I'm sure he doesn't see why he should talk to people who don't share his worldview, and people who would probably not like it if he was to be seen to be engaging with me. And this is really the sadness of it all, that but for people being more cooperative and being more mindful of facts and logic rather than vested interests and this life concerns, that the problem is not being solved. There are clues when people obviously don't believe in God. I'm thinking of a particular person who knows to say Jesus a lot, and he may fool unthinking people into thinking that he's a good Christian, but really he's a cynic using the brand of Jesus to make people think that he might be a nice person after all, when all the time he is this Islamophobe who cannot really understand the nature and purpose of religion, or pretends he does not understand the nature and purpose of religion. And Sadly, these people will always fall back to, well, I just preferred it before the browning of Britain, before all these foreigners came. That's what I prefer. Fine, prefer it all as much as you like, but you haven't got a time machine, have you? All you can do is understand how you came to be where you are. And how Christianity is actually the most despised religion in the whole wide world. It is certainly despised by the Western ruling classes, the liberal establishment, especially despises Christianity. Yes, a lot of them pretend to be Christian, people like Trump and Nancy Pelosi and all the others, but they don't believe. They just think that by calling themselves Catholics and Presbyterians and whatever, they are claiming some token of respectability, but really, Christianity is about to be massively discredited as the religion of idolaters who worship an executed blasphemer. The Iranians are still being quite polite about Christianity, but really, I think they need to ramp it up on Christian theology and Christian idolatry. Because these Christians won't give it up until they can see the advantage of having an easy to believe religion with a foundation of history and legal practices that would allow them to learn from the lessons of history. And the main lesson of history that nobody seems to have properly understood is that Christianity is an anachronism. An anachronism is something that should no longer exist in this age because it has been superseded by something better. So a republic supersedes monarchy. Absolute monarchy is not what any honest, rational, and moral Westerner would choose for himself. He would still want his constitutional rights. So what would be the point of Christianity if its original purpose was to defend the divine right of kings to rule? And if you don't want any king to rule, then monarchy and Christianity and the church become redundant. And this is what they cannot face. And a much better mechanism is already up and running in Iran. And this is something else Westerners also need to come to terms with, that they have the inferior moral system, the inferior belief system, because it is so hard to believe, and because their absolute monarchs were so ruthless in punishing any of his subjects who didn't agree with his religion. It became the practice to pretend to be Christian, and these centuries of hypocrisy have clearly destroyed Western morality. I promote the Quran because it is scientific in that its scientific claims are provably true. Its rules are fair enough. It supports the First Amendment. Recently, I've noticed that when I try to make the point that the First Amendment is supported by Chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, I can't seem to post it on my mobile. And this is curious because, well, it's not offensive, is it? It's just informative, and somebody, the powers that be, do not want the connection to be made between the Quran and the First Amendment. Of course, there will be many people only too keen to deny it. It is exasperating that not many Muslims seem to be wanting to support me in the making of this point. But there are other ways of getting around this problem.